I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Gadigal people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
Food and social rituals are still for me the thing that unlocks wine. And that's where I feel a wine achieves its full potential. And I bet if you asked any winemaker we know, what do you see as your wine's full potential? I bet it's just drinking with food with friends. Like that's wine's ultimate incarnation.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Chris Morrison is a name synonymous with Australia's beverage and hospitality scene. You name it, he's done it. Quite literally. He is a mover and shaker and has been at the forefront of the industry for as long as I can remember. And just when you think he might be ready to step back, he reinvents himself once again, challenging us to rethink how we operate in this industry. In case you can't tell, I'm a huge fan with oodles of respect for this man, who also happens to be a really nice guy. Hey Chris, thanks for joining me.
Hi Shanteh, how are you?
I'm really well. Look, I did have a very long introduction that went on for paragraphs and I thought, oh my goodness, get a hold of yourself. So I did rein it in a little bit.
No, that's a very generous one of you. Not since my mum had 2 gin and tonics on Christmas have I had such a nice thing said about me.
Well, it's totally deserved. And I'm thrilled that I get to have this interview with you because you have been interviewed on The Weeds before and I felt a little sad that it wasn't me. So I'm thrilled that you've joined me and I'm just so interested to hear what you've been up to. But let's do a little recap of kind of a little bit of your history for the people that haven't heard what you're all about before, because you have basically done every facet of the industry in the last 30 years. So tell me a little bit about how you got your start and then kind of how you weaved your way through different roles.
I think when I started, I guess I entered wine through the kind of lens of hospitality. And I think when I started, as you said a long time ago, hospitality was this kind of catchment for kind of, I guess, loose and largely unfocused people, which kind of described me down to a T. I started working in restaurants straight out of school. I was lucky enough early on to work in a great restaurant in Sydney called Watermark down in Balmoral Beach, which is no longer there. But I first encountered wine in a restaurant setting through there. But my dad had always been in wine. We were in pubs in country Victoria, so hospitality in that kind of way has always been in my blood. But Dad's first, wine experiences were driving his car down to the Eden and seeing Cyril Henschke with hoses around his shoulder, having tastings with him. He had a really sort of early introduction into wine, and I sort of got that through him, I think. Restaurants became where I sort of saw my family and home being built, and I think that's why I love them so much. And that led me into wine. I got really lucky early. I found a really great mentor, and I know you and I both benefited from great mentors, men and women in our life over the years, and I think I was lucky to get one early. But he was kind of that waiter that wasn't a sommelier, but he had such strong wine knowledge. He kind of was on the fringes of wine service, but he was the guy that everyone went to talk about wine or understand the wine they poured or what was coming through the wine list on any given time. And he gave me those kind of first introduction into wine. And I think that his little lessons he taught me have steered me pretty much my whole career. Soon after that, I left Australia and went to work in London because I really, back then in the mid-90s, France was still the divining rod for, wine collections, wine lists and wine training. So I wanted to go work in London because at that point, London was still probably the most exciting wine market in the world from a restaurant perspective. They had no industry of their own, so every wine style in the world came into London because they had such a huge industry around restaurants, and every wine was represented by people who really knew their stuff. So it's incredibly competitive and a really steep learning curve. So I got to spend a few years working for French sommeliers in London, came back to Australia, went straight into a role at Belmondo, again, another restaurant that's closed, but it was a great Italian restaurant on the rocks under Stefano Manfredi. And I have some of my best memories of that restaurant, going in the morning to start shift early, get ready for lunch. And his mum, Franca, had this flour-coated trestle table in front of the kitchen where she'd be making pasta since 5 o'clock in the morning. And that would be our breakfast. And it was just the way that restaurant functioned was just such a beautiful snapshot of hospitality at that time. And I loved it there. And I really started to work for in professional sommelier teams. And then my career sort of, as you know, Shanteh, with Soms in Sydney back then, there wasn't a huge, the industry was nowhere near as big as it is now. In terms of numbers of restaurants, in terms of what we invested into wine programs and wine professionals. I think when I first came back from London, there probably would have been about 20, 24 full-time sommeliers in Sydney. And now we both know that barely covers half the roster of Maryvale. And now, moving on from there, I sort of really felt the sommelier role was my chosen vocation. And I sort of started working in restaurants such as Key, Est, and then ended up working for Guillaume Brahimi as his head sommelier at Benelong, where we got 3 hats. And then I gave up on wine for a while and I went into the corporate world. So I was the global wine and champagne ambassador for Pernod Ricard for 6 years. And then went back to work for Guillaume as his group sommelier when he was opening more restaurants in Crown. And that sort of led me to bigger roles around Keystone as their wine director. And then moving on from that, I went and worked for EVT, so QT Hotels, then broadly across the whole public listed company. And like you, I've done Led Evans tutorial, won some awards, got a lot of recognition, did a lot of writing, released a book, did a lot of judging. So, yeah, I mean, I've been around long enough that I think I managed to tick a lot of boxes. And then when I was, much like I think a lot of people last year, there was headwinds in my business and I was made redundant from my role as director of beverage. And when that happened, I sort of had a bit of a crossroads. I think a lot of people, particularly in drinks and hospitality, are having now in terms of what's next. I think the industry sort of settles on what that even looks like broadly. And I started working with a really great software company about building a digitized and mobile hospitality training platform that focused on food and wine. And that's kind of what's my focus at the moment. And that's kind of what's led me to speaking with you today.
What a pro. I mean, you can see why you were such an excellent sommelier. If you had to go to a table and capture someone's attention within 2 minutes, you could do it, while you were half asleep. So thank you.
Most times we were, I think, weren't we?
Yes. But I mean, what an incredible career you have had so far. You said you were pretty lucky in joining the industry at a good time, but you were incredibly ambitious and driven. Where do you think that comes from?
I guess a blend of things. I'm naturally curious. I think I'm creative and innovative. I love people. I'm built around relationships. I have a scorching case of undiagnosed ADHD probably, and I need to satisfy that. And one of the ways I do that is constant connection. I think that's why for me, my ambition really comes down to the fact that we're getting into wine was something I did because I thought it was the best way for me to express my passion for hospitality. And I think as I've gotten older and I've sort of worked my way, I guess, through as you know, like you've got a huge workload now in terms of wine, especially with the companion and all those responsibilities you have now in steering probably, which is still our most influential wine publication each year, is that for me, I had pretty good palate and a pretty good nose, but I think what I was always passionate about was experiencing wine and experiential marketing around wine and sales. And I think nothing captures that better than a restaurant table, like a dining table in a restaurant. That's still for me the best place in the world to sell wine. And I still believe that now. I've always believed it my entire career, since back in Watermark days, where that man taught me just a lesson around wine that I've never forgotten. It's just, it's never about you. Even though everything in wine teaches us that it is, everything we study is about our palate and our sense of taste and smell and our mind and our knowledge. In the end, when it comes to translating that into a successful experience, you have to not make it about you. So that's what I think my ambition's always been. And, I'm like all sommeliers, I've got a healthy ego. I still think give me a full restaurant and a wine list and I'm as good as anybody, even at my age, with my needs. But I still believe that the best thing about wine in this country in particular is that wine in Australia has grown up over the last 40, 50 years, I think largely in the context of restaurants and dining. And I think that's something that has always kept me really motivated.
I feel that you have always communicated and kind of, played to your strengths, and you have been, your passion for kind of good communication has always come across, particularly in This Is Not a Wine Guide. That was a really influential book for me in my career, and that I passed on to other sommeliers. And I think that what I love about you is that you always want to do good things for the industry, but do it in a way that really resonates through your unique character. And that really comes across. So when you come to the Wine Bite now, this digital learning platform, how the heck do you communicate that in a digital way without you and your charisma standing up in front of people?
So I think that's a really big question, and I feel like you're someone who can probably answer that as well as I can, considering where your career's taken you into working alongside people like Mike, Vinny, Dave and the team, Phil, and working for James and the guy. Like, that's still our, where so many people access information about wine. What you and I have seen over our careers is the growth, obviously, in quartermaster sommeliers and Wine Spirit and Education Trust, qualifications that have pretty much given us the most educated and knowledgeable generation of wine professionals probably in history, but still louder than ever is a cry from operators that we have a shortage of skilled staff who can't sell wine to customers. So for me, what that suggested, or what it shows for me, and the data sort of talks to it, is that with new generations like millennials and Zs coming into the market looking for wine, a top-down learning model, training model, just can't keep up with the growth in hospitality and in wine. So I felt that we also need to work in tandem with higher learning, is a bottom-up approach that can not just train people, and put them on a learning journey and then recruit them to be real storytellers and advocates for Australian wine. And I feel that's the challenge that faces not just wine, but hospitality as new people enter the market with different choices and preferences, is that we need to update the way we talk about wine, because I think the training we've gone through, as I said before, is really largely, self-centric. It's focused on your senses and your taste and your preferences, and it's educating your mind. And I think that's vital. But I feel that there is a huge opportunity for Australian wine now to retell our story using and embracing innovation and technology. And that's kind of what I work with a software company on, and that's where WineBite was born.
I think this is so exciting because I too kind of left the restaurant scene when there was a little bit of a shortage of staff, and it frustrated me because multiple times I heard, not within my own organization, but across the kind of industry, when someone would suggest someone to kind of be the next person in training, it would be like, oh, have they got it? Oh, I don't think they have. And it's like, all they need is that kind of infectious, passion for wine. And it comes across, right? Because if you're engaging at a table, it doesn't matter if you're, you've got some quick, strange kind of lisp or whatever it may be, if you're passionate at a table, that energy, infects you. And so I always totally believe too that if we train people from the ground up, give them the hook, give them that first glass of wine and let them go, because then, the sky is the limit. So I think that's really exciting. Tell me a little bit more about kind of who this digital platform is for and how they would kind of get involved, and is this for multiple venues? Is it for one? How do they engage with it?
So it's based on micro-learning software, and it's now backed by AI machine learning. So both of those work in tandem. For us, the micro-learning software is really about how we get people just to remember more stuff. There's great science out there about learning curves or forgetting curves, in terms of if you and I both presented in front of small groups and large groups, and then if someone had to come and ask us 4 weeks later, how much did they remember about what you said? I think most of us would be comfortable saying maybe they remembered my name and maybe where the wine came from. But in that month, a lot happens in their lives and a lot of information fills those gaps. So spaced repetition is a big thing in micro-learning, like repeating of key information, adapting questions to make sure when people are getting things wrong, we focus on those. So the real benefits of this is it's adaptable. It really tailors itself to the learner. It's cost effective and flexible, and the results are really immediate and measurable. But it doesn't just grow knowledge. For me, it's exactly what you said, Shanteh. It builds confidence because it teaches the floor guys, the young kids, right, unskilled and new to the industry, that the only two things you need to do your job well are a menu and a wine list. You don't need a textbook. Right, the 1 + 1 = 3 comes from you. Like you make those things come together, not some 250-page textbook you got to read in a classroom. Like your classroom is actually a living room, and your living room has a menu and a wine list to bring. Because wine lists are just still numbers and letters on paper. You need a heartbeat to bring it to life, right? Like it just sticks on a page unless someone's talking to you. And that is a really important skill set that we wanted to build into this micro-learning platform. How they access it is it's subscription-based. So it's a yearly subscription, kind of like an iTunes subscription. An operator owns it, and they determine the number of licenses available. And it is designed for people who are new to the industry, who are unskilled. It is not. It doesn't have this idea of assumed knowledge. It's a start line, and I think that's what you've articulated really well there. Is like if you and I went for a sandwich in a deli, or we went to a three-hat restaurant, the first 30 seconds are the same everywhere. It's like a greeting, a smile, an inquiry, and an offer. If we get those, no matter, we should expect that everywhere we go. But at the same point, a three-hat restaurant, you've got highly trained staff. But in a deli, maybe not so. And that's what it's built for. It's built for large groups and small operators. It's built for anybody who's got a broad base of largely new and unskilled labour. And many of these, like, labour now is different, right? Like labour probably now is our most diverse ever in terms of identity, age, ethnicity, diet, faith and belief systems. Like to have a one-size-fits-all training approach just doesn't reflect the needs and requirements of people who have run businesses anymore. And I think in particular, it's not talking to new workers, and it's not using tools and language they find familiar. So that's what WineBite was built on. Technology they can access through their phones, a language and tools that is every day, and it builds a toolkit for them that they can use the very next service. So there's a sense of immediacy about it. And I feel like that working in tandem with higher learning also allows operators to identify talent quicker and invest their money more wisely, rather than this broad spectrum WSET. Everyone gets level 2. It's a huge cost, right? And we all know people can leave the next day and take that IP with them. But if they can understand a business and brand from the ground up, and then they can show they've invested in you, then maybe that's a person worth putting through higher education.
I think this is fascinating and so needed in this industry, because I agree with you. You know, it's that starting element of how do we take all these, you know, skills that you do eventually have, that you do naturally, and divulge it down into something that's tangible for someone to enter into that. And like you said, to get the hook, and then they're hooked for life. And I think that is so great. We have such a better understanding of how people learn now, like you talked about earlier, neurodivergent people, and hospitality does, like you said, it attracts people that didn't necessarily, you know, gravitate towards that kind of office space. And so being able to give them something that gets the ball rolling is so important. And I think that it's totally fantastic, and I really want to see it in operation.
I'll send you. I can send you a link to have a look at. But I love what you just said. Then, like, hospitality naturally attracts people who aren't square pegs and square holes. They're a little bit off centre, right? And I think that's one of the magic parts of what we do as sommeliers, and but also what we do as wine professionals, is hospitality fosters such a tangible and impactful connection with wine. Like food and social rituals are still, for me, the thing that unlocks wine. And that's where I feel a wine achieves its full potential. And I bet if you asked any winemaker we know, what do you see as your wine's full potential? I bet it's just drinking with food with friends. Like that's wine's ultimate incarnation. I think we've got so few cultural touchstones left anymore. We don't have the celebration or the rituals that we used to have, I think. And I think the dining table is one of our last few. And I think that's where wine's opportunity to work in tandem with bigger strategy pieces, with Wine Australia and other marketing government bodies about what's the future. Even in particular is like we know we've got a massive grape glut in the background, and the only way to unplug that is price. So the next few years for Australian wine are going to be pretty tricky. So for me to start to recruit a generation of front of house staff who can tell a story that's rooted in gastronomy and history, and it can be tangible and tactile, is I think something we need to really balance out the necessary commercial decisions that we're going to have to make in the future.
I completely agree with you. And I think I love that about you, because from the time I've met you, you've always been about the growth of the industry and about getting new people involved and encouraging them. And it's not always the case when, you get people that kind of sit on these kind of top tiers and they quite like being up there and feel challenged by young newcomers. And you've always just been somebody that you wanted to share your knowledge and get people, like you said, collectively to love what we do. And you're still doing that to this day, which is so amazing.
Thank you. I think that's the thing for a lot of people in hospitality. You stick with it. Well, you realise pretty quickly that it's vocational and occupational. Like, I don't think I can do anything else. So I've got to keep finding my way back to it. It's like, you step out of the stream or the river, the currents, and you've got to find your way back to the water source. And I think that's, for all the decisions I've made in my career, it's always led me back to this. And I'm probably now more passionate about mentoring and training than I ever have, because as I get older, I'm a father now. So I've got this little reminder of what the future is going to look like potentially. And I want to make sure he grows up in a world where, if he chose to work in the industry that I love, that there's tools there to help him succeed. And I feel like we've got this, you talked about, money outside of hospitality and Gen Z and all these kind of things that have really basically put restaurants on steroids for the last 10 years or so with this massive growth. And I think that's been fantastic. But I don't think our tools to help equip our teams to do their jobs well have kept up. So I think this is the year right now where wine more than ever has had a wake-up call and said you need to adapt and innovate because the rest of the world is. And I believe that there's always space for the matrix of flavour and aroma, understanding of terroir, scores, and we both, done Len Evans, we both know the show system well. That has such an important place in wine, but what we need to also have running underneath that is this point of entry that is about experiential drinking, that is about food and about social rituals, and people understanding that unlocking wine comes not through wine itself, because wine is a really small part of a really good wine experience. And those other parts now are more important than ever. And I think that's what we tried to work on with this learning platform.
I think about, the younger days of trying to study, and I'm not somebody that particularly holds facts in my brain very well. And I always found where certain quartermasters had its really big challenges for me in that I felt very comfortable at the table. But if you asked me to spit out, 45 facts about some random wine that I've never tasted, it just didn't sync with me. And I think, and that's in an area where I was doing fairly well in my career. And I think also about, the many wonderful waiters I worked with that had an immense, capacity for remembering who made the table and who was the designer of this or that, and then they all had to find their own way of how they started and what worked for them and how they learnt that information. And it's very difficult to bring in someone new and say, well, you need to know all this. I don't know how, but you got to figure it out. And I love that there's an entry point. For them.
Yeah, I feel that that's probably, I think, the greatest challenge that we have now, the people who are coming into the industry. Like you look at millennials being this, millennials and Gen Z are about 2/3 of our workforce now. And millennials are going to be in this leadership cast, but the Gen Zs that are of drinking age, they're the ones that come in, as you said, with this kind of natural distrust of institutionalized power structures, right? The last few years have taught them that. Yeah. So they're driven by different things. They're driven by technology, 100%. They're digital natives. They're driven by authenticity, and they're driven by values. And they want to they want a connection with things that reflect those. And wine is one of them. I just think wine has everything these kids want, right? We're just not talking to them. And I think
they understand.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we can switch that on. I think wine will find its place again in their, share of throat, their diet around drinks. And I think that importantly, though, we go back to diversity in the labour force because labour, the European pipeline in Australia, what it is now compared to what it was after the pandemic, and is different. We don't have the same kind of influx of people coming into Australia who bring with them food and wine culture because, the European stuff from France, Italy, Spain, Portugal is nowhere near as robust as it used to. And most of the workforce now is, Pan Asia, China, Afghanistan, Emirates, Pakistan, India, obviously growing exponentially. And these are incredibly smart, talented, hardworking people, but don't have a wine culture. So, and most of them, a lot of them have concerns around diet or their choices or belief systems that mean they can't drink. So the crucial thing about entry point into wine, especially learning about it, is you must not have to drink wine to do it. You should need to learn how to sell wine and tell stories about wine, but not drink it. Because what that excludes is literally tens of thousands of people from being onboarded effectively or even being suitable for a role just because of the choice they have to make because of their upbringing or their background.
That's so true. It's so true. And we need to be thinking, this broad, don't we? To have a future for our industry, we need to think this broad. We need to think about everybody and the inclusion of everybody.
Yeah, completely. I think there's room for both. This is the thing, wine's always relied on, I think, new voices and new ideas to, safeguard its future. And all those have always run parallel to more traditional and more sort of classical ideas. I think there's room for everything in wine. I think what we probably would benefit from, in particular with hospitality, which is our wheelhouse, is that we start looking at technology as a way to tell stories, not to be a way to reduce service to a number. Because remember, if you look at what we do in front of house, automation is a real thing, right? There's a lot of stuff we do that can be automated. Hospitality as an experience can never be automated. It's something you need a human to bring to life. So the more tools we build into that kit again, I think the better off wine will be in particular in terms of storytelling and hospitality.
Yeah, we certainly have to work with the progression that is happening in the world. I think a really good example of that kind of embracing of especially Gen Z was the kind of natural wine movement that kind of happened in Australia and how on board, young drinkers were with the way that kind of expressed itself in that it wasn't, telling people that you had to have understanding of tannins and this. It was just kind of like young producers doing their own thing in the way they wanted to. And I saw the embracement of this movement and, people being part of the story because it wasn't what their dad has drunk and always had sell it. It was, oh, no, they're in startup and they're new and I don't know really how they make the wines, but it's bloody delicious. And people just got on board and it was so exciting to see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's been a really big, a really huge narrative that's informed me over the last few years about building, not just obviously post my book, but the platform as well. And if you looked at the book and this platform, and my book's over 50,000 words, which was it's actually a funny story. The initial manuscript was about 15,000 and it was supposed to be a shorter sort of more kind of like pocket version, but it blew out because the publisher at that time wanted to be a coffee table book, Christmas gift giving, stuff like that. And I felt it kind of got a bit long and the the platform was really about distilling the best parts of the book into a digital format. And what I've seen obviously with that happening and the book and the platform is there's not one mention of flavour, aroma or regionality in either of them. And what reason with that is when this sort of came around, like Rootstock and the boys, they sort of really kicked it off. And what I learned from that and what I saw as a result is when you focus more on texture, mouthfeel and food, people get it. Like texture and mouthfeel are universal. Flavour and aroma are subjective. And they're informed by all matters of things, personal experiences, trauma, joy, sadness, happiness, loss. Like they all inform our senses of taste and smell. But how a wine feels and its basic tastes, they're universal. And that's what chefs use to unlock food as well. So within that is a really important relationship that we use to underpin this first steps into bringing food and wine together in Wine Bite and in my book. And I feel like the most success I've had in training has been using that to help new workers understand how to use a menu and a wine list together.
Because they don't even realize that they have a vocabulary around it because they eat every day, right? So it's all in their senses there. It's already inside their body. And then when you give a little bit of vocalization to that, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I totally get that, you
Yeah,
know?
completely. I think that's a big thing about service is, again, what I said we were talking about before is going onto the restaurant floor every night doesn't, if you're, you've got a high level of qualification, it's not about you. As soon as you step on the restaurant floor, it's about the 120 people coming in for dinner that night and what they want and what their budgets are. And maybe they've had a rough day and maybe they're celebrating. But you need to find out what they want. And to presume that you know what they want, I think is where sommeliers traditionally have broken that relationship between themselves and their guests. And rebuilding that relationship or really improving that relationship comes down to just inquiry and right questions, right answers, and finding out what they want and then using your expertise to give it to them. And it could be just a glass of Sauvignon Blanc and get out of my way. Or it could be I really want to talk to you, but never assume that they want to. And I think out of COVID, potentially we've got a crisis of over-education. And I think now we're trying to unwind that a little bit and focus on hospitality, which I think is really healthy for the industry.
Definitely. The 101. What am I here for? um, I mean, I think it's interesting because you worked for so long in hospitality. And like you said, you were always asking, why am I here? What do these people want from me? Did you feel that when you left that you asked yourself that question? Did you, in maybe during COVID, say to yourself, Chris, what do I want? And a bit more of a focus on rather than giving out all the time, maybe giving in a little bit more?
Yeah, I think COVID was a really, the time I think that happened from everyone we know, right? When you work in an industry where you spend so much time filling other people's cups, like who's filling mine? And our cups all ran pretty much dry, but because all of us, I think, in hospitality, the industry it was a really important function for us in terms of a lot of people I know get a real dopamine hit out of caring for someone else and taking care of people and the act of service. And when that was taken away from us, it was kind of like, where do I place that? I, like everybody, had a crisis of faith with hospitality. I didn't think it was for me anymore. I didn't know what the industry was going to look like. And even coming out of it and with my last role, seeing how fast it was growing and trying to find your place in it when, you're a specialist like I am, was challenging. I think, but being able to step away from it and seeing the boundary lines around hospitality, what it can and can't do, has really helped me understand my place in it again. And I think also speaking with mentors again, just talking, having conversations, understanding the industry better has really been important, because what I wrestle with sometimes is we worry about the influx of untrained. We need more bodies at the base, right? For this big pyramid of labour in Australia in hospitality, we need more bodies and then more people to fuel our growth. But at the same time, it feels like we're losing and purging an experienced generation out of hospitality at the top level or a middle management level who have a greater skill set than nearly any other time in history. So there's this input of we're not getting enough trained staff in the bottom, and we seem to be purging a lot of staff out of the top. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting time. I think for me, this year is going to be a really big year, I think, in particular in our category, wine, as I think everyone's searching for where our strategies are going to land and how on-premise will feel their role within that again. But look, I'm as passionate about hospitality now as I've probably ever been, and I think that's sort of why I built a platform as I get older, that I can continue to put the very best of me into something that can hopefully give back to it.
I love that. And I can't, I'm like nodding away here silently because I very much was worried again for that, thinking if we burn these people out, they're only going to be in this hospitality industry for so long and then we lose them. And just like you said, there is an innate pleasure in looking after people and being in our industry, dealing with food and wine and beautiful produce. So, you want to keep them around. And I think, like you said, the more we can support them, the more we give them tools, the more that they can see a prolonged future, the longer we keep them. And it's so important. Chris, if someone asked you one day, what do you want to be remembered for? What was it all for at the end of the day? What would you say?
Oh, that's big. That for me, helping people is basically using the strengths that I feel I've already got, which is empathy, emotional intelligence, and applying that in a way that lift people up. I mean, my grandfather he passed away many years ago. He was the greatest man I've ever known. But he always said, people judge you by who you lift up, not you push down. And he was a great man. And he taught me that lesson. And I think that's something I want to pass on to my son is you're measured by those who you lift up and bring with you, not who you push down. And I think I'd like to sort of say to him, well, I live my life in a way that lifted people up.
Well, I think you can probably already do that because you certainly have played such a wonderful role for many people in this industry. So thank you for that, Chris. Tell me a little bit about after Wine Bite or during Wine Bite, what else are you doing? Because I know you're not somebody that rests on your laurels. So are you writing a second book? What else can we expect in the future from the wonderful Chris Morrison?
Thank you. I think for me, the book was a really big watershed for me. There was a lot of things around it that made writing the book easy at that time. I was fortunate enough to have Terry Durack and Jill Dupleix working with me on it. And Murdoch was a great publisher, and it's kind of a perfect storm. I would like to write another book. I'm writing articles at the moment, building newsletter, just keeping busy as Wine Bite is something that's occupying a lot of my time. But I'm also looking for new roles out there in hospitality again, and interesting to go back to the market after a year or so and see what's changed and what hasn't. But again, I'm excited about this year. I'm really also focusing on myself. I mean, this is probably off subject, but, your mind, body, getting to the end of the year in a good place, like all these things I think are necessary from this mental health standpoint that hospitality has taught me more than anything about. I grew up in an era where that wasn't even talked about. It was get on with it, turn up next day after 3 doubles in a row and don't complain. And that's where a lot of the distrust we talked about, a lot of young people in the hospitality also came from, not great salaries, enterprise agreements, that weren't really lived up to. There's a lot of bad juju in hospo, and I think for me, it's stepping out from that and looking at what's happening next to me. Wine Bite is fulfilling all these roles as well. Like it's giving me something to really invest my time in. And I think this year is the year where I'm sort of going to apply myself the most to it.
I'm really, really glad to hear that. You can't do what you do if you're not looking after yourself and making sure that your cup is full and that you're getting everything that you need as well as a father, as a human. So I'm really glad to hear that. Chris, if you could only drink 3 beverages for the rest of your life, what would they be and why? So what is your jam? What are we drinking if we get together soon?
Okay, so champagne's number one. Like that's Desert Island no matter what. I won't go into specifics. The champagne, Tsingtao and hard solo.
Hard solo, what?
Tsingtao because of Golden Century and too many, a lot of PTS from there, and also, a lot of solved PTS and Golden Century growing up.
Totally.
And hard solo because I've just got this candy sugar thing at the moment, and I had one the other day and I was like, that's my jam. So maybe next week it'll change, but hard solo is definitely my jam at the moment.
I love that. That's so funny. I'm a bit of a gross person for a good Canadian Club and Dry on tap, and I just think sometimes it's that bit of sugar where you're like, oh, especially after a long day of judging or something, you're like, oh, that sugar, that works real well. And solo is a good drink, isn't it?
It's a hard solo. I mean, they've changed the packaging because I think my son looked at it and went like, well, that looks yummy. But I don't keep it around the house. It's kind of, they're in a locker. But I champagne's number one for sure.
Excellent.
Champagne's number one. 3
excellent drinks, and they say a lot. I could talk to you for the rest of the day, but you do have places to be and things to do. Chris, it is an honour. I love everything you do, and you've just brightened my day for chatting with me. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I cannot wait to hear more about the Wine Bite.
Thanks, Shanteh. I really appreciate your time today.
This is Over a